Welcome to the latest edition of At the Table. This is our special Impact of Trump in Chicago show. I have with me some of the best Sun Times reporters who have been covering quite deeply in exploring the question, what is going to be the Donald Trump impact on the city and the state? As we tape this, we have just a few days of experience of the new president, whose immigrations are, as we know, promised to make Chicago ground zero. So let's introduce the panel and then we'll get going. First, we have Elvia Malagón, social justice reporter. Tom Schuba, who covers criminal justice as a reporter and editor. Brett Chase, environmental justice reporter, and Abby Miller, who is a business reporter. Elvia, let me start with you since you are on the ground. You have the expertise. You've been following the story of migrants to Chicago for years now. What do you see in just in the first hours of the new White House, impact on Chicago now and a little bit ahead?
Yeah, in the first 24 hours of the second Trump presidency, we saw a lot of anxiety and a lot of fears throughout the Chicagoland. There was a lot of social media posts about possible sightings of immigration officers, either in Chicago or in the suburbs. So this has led to a lot of fear because, of course, Trump did say that Chicago was going to be one of the areas that was going to be singled out. However, from our reporting, we haven't verified that anyone has been detained by ICE so far. But certainly groups are still on edge and they're still doing Know Your Rights campaigns. And a lot of people are creating plans for what could happen if they're detained by ICE.
So, Tom, what is the position of law enforcement in the city surrounding area of this expected uh, raids, stepped up enforcement?
Well, it's the Chicago Police Department's policy that they don't, assist with immigration enforcement. That has to do with our sanctuary status and local and state laws. So, yeah, they don't involve themselves with ICE operations or operations of the Department of Homeland Security as far as deporting people and detaining people and things like that. They can't intervene though. Um, so yeah, they're kind of from what I understand, just kind of waiting, suspended animation, same way that a lot of people in Chicago are, waiting to see what happens.
So there's new reports out that the new Trump Justice Department may try to prosecute or force local officials to cooperate. Now we know, all of us know that Mayor Brandon Johnson, Governor Pritzker say, they'll have to go through me. But if what are the tools out there though to try and force the hand of a sanctuary city law enforcement, besides going to court?
That I don't know.
Tom,
I don't
yeah,
know. I saw that, I saw the reporting on the letter to the Justice Department today, same as anyone else. I really
yeah.
don't know what the precedent is there.
So you wrote a little bit about an immigration center in Chicago that's kind of a central place. Could you tell our listeners a little bit what that facility is and what you think the role may be?
It's what's called the Fusion Center. So these were, funded by the federal government, Department of Homeland Security with grants. They're across the country. They're essentially used to coordinate resources between federal, state, local law enforcement agencies. This was, propped up in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. But yeah, we have one of these in Chicago. According to police directives, we have Department of Homeland Security officials who are there all the time. We have people from Customs and Border Protection where they're on a rotating basis. Same with Homeland Security investigations. These are agencies that are involved in immigration and deportation, and yeah, they kind of work together with CPD out of this facility, and we see this across the country. There have been a lot of concerns raised about what data sharing looks like there, and uh, how that could kind of deal with immigration as well.
So, Elvia, I know you're on the street and you're working with our colleagues who are on the street. And I'm in Washington, D.C., would I see or sense any palatable change? Are stores empty in neighborhoods where there might have a high migrant population? Is there Are the restaurants empty? Are people afraid to go out right now? Can you paint a picture if anything has changed?
Well, it's a little bit hard to say because this is all happening as Chicago is also dealing with a very cold front. So yesterday, yes, there were not a ton of people out in the streets, but it was also below zero. So not many people, immigrants or not, were out in the street. But we do know that some people are certainly making a lot of adjustments. One attorney that we spoke to yesterday, she mentioned she got as many as 40 phone calls just in the morning of people asking her, should I go to work this week? Should
Wow.
I skip work? One woman that I talked to this morning, who's an immigrant from Honduras, she mentioned that she's kind of looking behind her back and kind of looking around as she walks out. She's still going about her days, doing what she has to do, getting her kids to school, things like that. But she is precautious and she's also trying to think, okay, what's going to happen to my kids if I do get detained by ICE? So a lot of folks are having those kind of conversations right now.
Well, you mentioned the weather. So, Brett, environmental justice reporter, as I speak to you, Trump already withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. He withdrew from the World Health Organization. What's your analysis so far and what might be down the road?
Yeah, those two moves weren't a surprise at all. And I mean, most people don't care if we belong to a Paris Climate Accord. I mean, but I do think that this will, I mean, his actions will have an impact on the state's goals on climate. And they were already under pressure because there's this enormous energy demand from data centers, and renewable energy is not able to get connected to the grid fast enough. So we're looking at like a major energy bill that was passed and signed by Governor Pritzker just several years ago. We thought fossil fuels were on the way out. The Trump administration signaled no, they're here to stay. And then the thing that really surprised me on Monday was that this order on wind energy seems like just a real attack on a major source of renewable energy, and it is largely focused at the offshore, wind farms, but it also includes onshore and federal land. And then I think it's creating some confusion. I think at the very least, this is going to chill, some of the development on the wind. And of course, solar is supposed to be a big.
Right.
Um,
So I don't
Go
know.
ahead.
Do we have a lot of wind?
Illinois has a lot of wind energy. Yeah, I mean that's the big renewable. Solar was kind of next in the queue, and of course what we have. I mean, very dominant energy source is nuclear, and nuclear is supposed to be the bridge between fossil fuels and renewable, cleaner energy environment.
What about what do you foresee just in kind of routine enforcement of EPA rules? Between what the situation was last week and what we have now and looking ahead.
All we know is if you look at the last Trump administration, I did some stories around this, is that the data over time showed a decline in enforcement, in inspections, things like that. So you can't expect this to be a super active EPA. Now he's promised clean air and clean water, and there was some attention, especially under his first EPA administrator Pruitt, to focus on some of the Superfund sites. Those are the most hazardous, toxic waste sites in the country.
So that's a wait and see, but it seems like the first moves aren't necessarily encouraging from a climate and environmental thing. Also, I think the whole environmental justice program, I don't see it in the future with Trump. What do you think?
No, Biden was really active on environmental justice, and that of course is talking about this trend of low income communities of color just getting the same sources of pollution dumped on them over and over again, and Biden was trying to remedy that, but that's already in the crosshairs of Trump's.
Right. So now we're on to business. And Abby, one of the things Trump keeps talking about, and he already has in this few days, is having tariffs. He's talking mainly about China, Canada, Mexico. What is the impact of a Trump administration in the Chicago area, for the consumer and then for local businesses if he does slap on these tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we still have a little bit of a wait and see. And because of that, we're really seeing the construction community take a lot of different approaches to this. We have some of the folks at the very beginning of the process, like contractors and suppliers, who are really looking for other providers of these materials, like stone from China, steel from China, lumber from Canada, looking for suppliers and other folks in different countries that might not be hit as hard as these tariffs, where they could get lower costs for these materials. But with now we're looking at February 1st for tariffs, a lot of folks are taking this wait and see approach of what will these really look like? What will be the extent of the impact before they make any kind of official procedure?
So do you think, and everybody could just jump in on this, do you think that that the tariffs, just from what you know about local business and your own tolerance for prices, do you think they will be passed on, or will the businesses just have less profit? Meaning uh, there's choices here. So I guess Abby, you should go first, and if others want to chime in, isn't this a big crossroads for businesses if it's a substantial extra hit? Because again, so people know, a tariff is paid for not by the country, but by the, well, you explained it, Abby, so I'm sure you could do it simpler.
Sure. So these tariffs, we're looking at a tax on imports. So what this means is companies, for a lot of them, they do have to raise their prices because, they're paying for this new essential tax on anything that comes into the country that is impacted by the tariffs. And the impact on businesses, it really will depend on the size and the type of the business. A lot of these bigger brands, they've been diversifying their supply chains and where they get materials from for years now. This especially happened during the pandemic when, we saw a lot of the global supply chain disrupted. So some bigger folks have been prepared for this and might come out relatively unscathed, but smaller businesses that don't have the luxury of, pulling from a lot of different countries and just don't have the resources to have as robust supply chains really might struggle and see some higher costs.
So this is kind of a wild card question I want to put out that I want everyone to chime in on. One of the big promises that Trump made was he's going to lower the price of groceries. And we did a big story in the Sun Times, recently about, what was it, $9 a carton for eggs. So from each of your beats and perspective, is there anything that you see here that what could a president do, and maybe do quickly, to bring down the price of eggs? And just all of you as consumers, do you think that realistically, when you go shopping in a few weeks, any of you will see lower prices in Chicago in the stores that you go to? So Elvia, you go first, and then we'll go around the group.
I think as far as immigration goes, I think one thing I've heard people talk about is there are a lot of immigrant workers who are working a lot of jobs where, it includes like the restaurant workers, hospitality, but all kinds of different, construction, like Abby was talking about. So, if we do see a significant amount of people being forcefully, removed from the country, you do have to wonder what's that going to do for the bottom line of a business, and what's that going to mean for the person, consuming the goods. So there is a question of, what will the impact be if there is a decrease in that workforce?
So even you bring up a good point. I'm glad we're here, because even under the Biden White House in Illinois, we had a bipartisan coalition of Republican business people, restaurant owners, others that say our businesses are fueled by immigrant labor. Uh, what happens if that workforce either just moves away from Chicago, if they think it's a target city, or just detained here, detained and then are subject to some law enforcement removal. Uh, we have had a strong, united immigration rights community for no other reason. For the main reason the business people talked about was their own companies. So, what do you think is going to happen on that front, Elvia?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And Abby might have a better outlook on what unemployment rates are like, but I do think if we lose a segment of this workforce, there is a question about, well, are there going to be labor shortages? Is there anyone that's going to want to fill those kind of jobs for the type of wages that they were earning? And so there is a question of what's going to happen. And I mean, certainly here in Illinois, yeah, there's a long history of immigrant workers working in all types of sectors.
Mm-hmm. So, Tom, and the rest of you, could you weigh in on? Do you sense that the things that may impact a city first, besides this immigration issue, which everyone is focused on now, might be consumer prices if they come down soon? I'm kind of asking you to be put on a hat as if you're a political reporter and all economists now. Is that the thing that you think will help give support for an administration, even though things are happening that may not, may not be things that the Democratic elected officials support? We do know that Trump gained more votes in the state of Illinois and in Chicago than he did the two other times he ran for office.
I mean, I think everyone's impacted by prices at the grocery store and, costs and inflation. I think a lot of the states that Trump won and rev people up about what he says is a threat of illegal immigration aren't impacted by this influx of migrants who've, fled other countries, right? Uh, Governor Abbott sent them to Denver, sent them to Chicago, sent them to New York. Um, so people in Pennsylvania and Georgia and states like that, they're cheering on this effort. They're not impacted by it the same way that they're maybe impacted by prices at the grocery store. And what we saw in the past with Trump's immigration efforts was, there was a lot of bluster. What was the real impact? We see deportations under all presidents, right? Uh, Obama was called the deporter in chief.
It was, yes.
Homan on CNN yesterday tried to discount the large number of immigrant or deportations that the Biden administration did by saying, "Oh, well, many of these were people caught at the border and sent back, and only 20% were based on ICE enforcement." So, yeah, I don't know. Like Elvia said, there's a lot of fear in the city right now, and it's having a chilling effect on people who are part of our communities, who contribute to our economy. Who pay into Social Security and don't get the benefits. Um, and maybe that's the most powerful tool that they're wielding right now, because frankly, uh, catching undocumented immigrants who they say are criminals is a bit of a game of whack-a-mole, especially after we've closed the shelter systems, especially when we don't have reportedly, coordination with the police department who may be making these arrests. Um, yeah, so I think as far as impact, yeah, I think if people feel that they're not paying $200 at the grocery store when they used to pay 100 and see that happening, maybe that will engender more support.
Mhm.
Obviously, the president got a lot of votes this time and won the election. So will it sway more people to be supportive of him, maybe support more of his agenda-driven stuff? Potentially, yeah.
Speaking of that, the other thing he did that already does have an impact is he did pardons for everyone who was convicted or pled guilty in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And uh, that included people who were convicted of violence against police officers. Do we know yet if we've had how many in Illinois people have been convicted or pled? And are any of them out yet as we speak?
It was 53. I think a lot of them were already out. We reached out to some of them and their lawyers the other day when the announcement came out. But yeah, I mean, like Trump positioned himself as the law and order president, right? And he's come in and he's granted pardons to convicted criminals, including Ross Ulbricht, who, created this uh, granted, kind of revolutionary website using, cryptocurrency payments to sell drugs to people on the internet. But prosecutors said that Ulbricht was trying to do murder for hire plots and pay for people to be killed. Trump has come in and said, well, no, we're going to let this guy out because this, part of my support in the tech base says that they
Right.
like this guy and he didn't do anything wrong. So what does that say about the rule of law? What does that say about how Trump says, I'm the law and order president? What are your actions saying, right?
Yeah. So Tom, and just so our listeners know, Tom is the expert, one of the experts in our news operation about Proud Boys, police with right-wing agendas. Does this encourage them now to be more upfront? These 53, will they feel empowered to be more public? I mean, what will happen now that they have this clemency?
Well, the January 6th protests certainly had like a chilling effect on like the public presentations of groups like the Proud Boys, which were well known to go to protests and pick fights with who they perceived as Antifa and go kind of butt into hot button debates like over what books were in school libraries and things of that nature. Uh, what we saw at on the inauguration day was a big group of Proud Boys in the street, back wearing their black and gold, before Enrique Tarrio, the guy who got the longest sentence based on the largest criminal prosecution in the history of this country, uh, was cut loose. And Enrique Tarrio was on, you know, Alex Jones's show yesterday, calling for government officials to be jailed based on that.
So we have a lot of people to keep track of now in Illinois just to see what their future holds and what they do now, in this Trump era. But Abby, one of the things that I wonder if this is going to be business that's good for Illinois is that there's this massive investment coming in AI, artificial intelligence centers. Is that a sector where Illinois could maybe get a win here, maybe build some data centers or something?
Absolutely. Illinois, and particularly the greater Chicago area, is becoming a huge leader in data center creation. And now we have the state's quantum campus that is supposed to break ground later this year. So that could lead to a ton of new jobs, especially in construction on the ground level. But just to kind of go back to what Tom and Elvia were saying earlier, just about kind of uncertainty and fear looking at the future. Speaking of construction jobs, I think that is one of the big fears that we are seeing here, especially with migrants. That is a huge part of employment in construction, and some folks that I've talked to in recent weeks have expressed uncertainty. Skilled labor is something that we already have a shortage of here in Illinois and Chicago, and this could make it worse as we're looking to get things like data center, that quantum campus, and other big mega projects in Chicago off the ground.
So we are wrapping up now, and I want to thank all of you. But before we go, can we just circle around with our whole panel and tell me what you're going to be watching most closely in the days, weeks, and months ahead? And how about Brett first, and then we'll go to the others.
Yeah, well, let me just address this data center issue because there's a negative side of it too. They demand so much. They consume so much energy. They're already leading to like higher electric bill rates for consumers this year. There's part of the reason that we need, more fossil fuels and really renewables as well is to keep these things going. And so that is a challenge. I mean, Governor Pritzker has two agendas. One is the clean energy, after signing that bill a few years ago, but he also is trying to attract data centers, which is potentially leading to issues with climate and dirty energy.
So they may align though on some business development. That's something to watch. Elvia, what are you going to be focused on most in the days, weeks, and months ahead?
We are still really watching and seeing if any sightings of ICE agents that folks are reporting, is that actually ICE detaining anyone? So we're doing a lot of verification on that and working to see if any of that comes to fruition. And of course, also seeing where do folks that, are detained in Chicago, where do they end up? Right now in Illinois, no local jails are allowed to have federal contracts for ICE detention. And there aren't any private immigration facilities in the state. So that means anyone who's detained is going to end up in a facility outside of Illinois. So it'll be also interesting to see where they end up, if they're able to get legal representation once they're there. But there's also other aspects of immigration that Trump is already changing. For example, refugee resettlement is going to be suspended. So I'm trying to connect with folks and talk to people about that. And of course, Illinois is one of the states that has joined to sue the Trump administration over trying to end birthright, which has been around forever and part of this country, but could substantially change the lives of a lot of people.
You're right, and that we're watching because it among many other things. So, Tom, your focus looking ahead.
I think Trump's promises for immunity of police officers could be a really important one moving forward. Like, I think, although probably the promise is legally dubious, much like the 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 birthright citizenship order that he signed. Who knows? It's the one that he made, and so we'll see, how that shakes out, and if he actually makes good on it or tries to. I think also just keeping track of what happens with ICE and the enforcement here, and how local officials might get pushed or bullied into you know, helping them or coordinating these efforts. And who are they going to ultimately detain, right? It seems like it's just a matter of time. Unfortunately, we're left kind of waiting. I think, it's unnerving to most people in Chicago, and I'm sure other major cities, especially those who are undocumented. And so who are they going to sweep up, right? Because Homan said, "Oh, well, we're going to go after criminals, and we want convicted criminals." But if we go to a house and there's someone there who's with them who's undocumented, then we're going to take them too. And you know, yeah, I think that's something that we need to keep track of. And unfortunately, this is an agency that, unlike local law enforcement agencies that we have relationships with, we don't really with ICE, because they don't have much of a footprint here. And so Elvia is working with advocates and people like that. We're trying to talk to local law enforcement sources, but yeah, it's kind of just sitting and waiting to see what the scale of this will be, and who will be impacted by it.
And Abby, from the business perspective, what's on your radar?
Yeah, so certainly keeping an eye on that February 1st, where we might see the tariffs, who it'll be targeting in particular. We know China, Canada, and Mexico could be some big players, but we're seeing 10%, 25%. So certainly waiting to see where that falls and if those are indeed going to be among some of the big targets. Countries targeted, but also certainly keeping an eye on too what we'll see in terms of housing, just residential housing. Something that Trump has talked about is trying to cut the red tape so developers can, really start building more housing, because not only here in Chicago, where we have a shortage of both housing and especially on the affordable end, we're seeing that nationwide. So certainly keeping an eye out on what that red tape in particular will be, and if it really will unlock more opportunities for developers.
Well, we have done a lot here. All our listeners, please know we all have written stories that were in the Sunday paper, but you could just go to suntimes.com and find our stories where this panel of experts I'm honored to work with have all, and I chimed in a little bit too when you look at the story and the impact on state and local government, but we have, using the expertise of the Sun-Times reporters, which is why I hope you all support us at suntimes.com. We are a nonprofit. We need your support. And so I want to thank Abby and Brett and Tom and Elvia for being with me tonight to try and make us all smarter as we go ahead. And everybody out there, thanks for joining us on this latest edition of At the Table.